consequences of the uses of particular kinds of chemicals, which were getting into the atmosphere and changing the parameters of the physical systems. And slowly we became aware of the fact that biodiversity, the numbers of species on the planet, was decreasing because, especially in bird life, this is where we first noticed it. But now we know, well, for example, bird life, of which we have about 10,000 species, 6,000 are in decline. More than 1,000 are threatened with extermination in this century, and therefore this curve is downward, even though the Audubon societies woke up people to the value of birds 100 years ago. So we have contributed to awareness, but we have not controlled the problem which causes this destruction. And this is therefore part of tomorrow's problem. We rationalize so much. The neurobiologists are teaching us that we always change our experience to fit what we already think we know. So you get a new impression, but it has to be made to fit what's already in the head. And this is why education is so difficult and requires so much cooperation. And therefore, in my day, professionally, we talked about habitat loss as the problem involved in the loss of biodiversity, bird life and other things. Now we know that birds are only an indicator group. The mammals are suffering as much decline as the birds are, and there are only about half as many mammals in the world as there are birds, and therefore everything is in decline. And the carrying capacity of the planet is diminishing, just as our numbers continue to grow and our demands grow. So there's a conflict there that the next generation especially is going to have to solve. We willy-nilly created the problem thinking that it was progress that we were involved in. When I first came to Rhode Island, for example, as a conservation educator, I was told, Roland, it's all right to criticize malfeasance. If some so-and-so is abusing his opportunities, say so. But don't criticize the system. We're all committed to the notion that growth was good for us and it would continue to be good for us. The problem is, it turns out, it's the system that's wrong. We have made false commitments from a religious point of view, a scientific point of view, and an economic point of view. And of course, it's the task of conservation education to clarify these problems, and I'm still spending quite a bit of time discussing the history of our errors, the accumulated errors which we all necessarily accepted from our parental generation and so forth. We were poorly instructed by the best minds of the day because we hang on too long to notions that are no longer functional. So it turns out, and we're only still awakening to this, and you people are more sensitive than the general population is, that there are too many people on the planet making too many demands on the capacity of the system to provide. Now, if we had time, we could go into the detail and and answer all the doubts that come to your mind about how dependable is this assessment of reality, you see. And that's the task that we face. So global warming is the test of the assumptions that we've lived by, especially in the last 2,000 years. Before that, we were just beginning as agriculturists, you see. 10,000 years ago, we began learning to grow crops instead of simply harvesting and hunting and so forth. Now, I don't need to go into the detail of this stuff because you know bits and pieces of it, even though you haven't studied it the way I've tried to do. Because one of my jobs, coming to Rhode Island in 1950, and then moving to National Audubon, looking at the national scene, was to ask, why is it that birds are decreasing everywhere? What are we doing wrong? So I had, first of all, to become an environmentalist, and then a political economist, even a philosopher and a theologian, because it's all those old notions that we hang on to that are problematic in adjusting ourselves and becoming part of the living environment instead of simply an exploiter of that system. I don't need to go into details because now we know we have a problem, generally speaking. President Bush is having trouble accepting that, you see. But it's a fact of life. Gus Speth, who is currently the director of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale, for example, has written a couple of books that are good, updated summaries of what we're up against. He wrote a book called The Bridge at the Edge of the World. And in it, he's frank enough. He's in the right ballpark, you might say. I don't think he's specific enough yet for people to grapple. But he says that the challenge now is to change the operating instructions for the modern economy. It's the economy that's the problem. We didn't wake up to this till 1999. 50 years ago, I was groping. Al Hawks improved on what I tried to do because he focused differently and was able to take advantage of greater understanding. And he was tenacious enough, for example, to oppose the conventional wisdom, for example, about building a new big reservoir in the center of Rhode Island. We didn't need it then, he argued, therefore let's wait, because meanwhile the system is productive. And this is the beginning of wisdom about living within the confines of nature that Aristotle told us was the significance of being intelligent creatures, to learn to live within the parameters that the environment, which is billions of years old, provides for us, you see. There's another man at Yale who's retired as a historian of the world economy, Emanuel Wallerstein. He wrote a little book called The End of the World as We Know It. The world is going to continue whether we manage things properly or not. But the point is, it's not going to be like yesterday. We are in the greatest transition that the human race has taken part in. The early one, of course, was the agricultural revolution, when we gave up 150,000 years of practice as hunter-gatherers. We became clever enough at that time so that some people learned to live in the desert, as the Bedouins did. People were not created to be Bedouins. They became Bedouins through testing and learning to live in that harsh environment. At the other end of the pole, in the polar regions, the Eskimo